I think most of the people that are dialing into the conference today will be well aware of the very tired talking point that we've heard time and time again about how Canada is a trading nation and that exports and imports, when added together, equal roughly about two-thirds of our gross domestic product. However, the reality, though, of these headline numbers is that they're really actually just a summation of individual business transactions, whether it's between companies or between companies and consumers. Given how vastly complex the world is, there are many interrelated dynamics that impact Canada's role in the global economy. And certainly, we've heard a lot about the strain on supply chains because of COVID 19, whether that's due to the travel restrictions that's restricted the ability of employees to move critical staff across borders, or the lockdowns that have impacted business operations all throughout the pandemic. And supply chains actually aren't just about exporting products either. It's also about importing inputs or moving products from their place of production via critical infrastructure, such as a port, like we'll hear about later today. We're fortunate enough to have with us four panelists who are out in the real world, who know something about the actual mechanics of trade and the state of the economy, and certainly how policy interacts with business. And we'll be able to get into that discussion as we get into the conversation. As you would have seen from your program, we're pleased to welcome Robin Sylvester, who's the president and CEO from the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, Michael Denham, president from Business Development Bank of Canada, Penny Wise, president from 3M Canada, and Linda Hasenfratz, the CEO of Linamar. We'll have a discussion amongst the panels, and then we'll get into a Q&A from the audience. So I would encourage people to start thinking now about the Slido questions that you want to submit and hear the panel address. So maybe to get the conversation, Linda, I'll turn it over to you to start us off.
Sure, thanks very much. So I think this whole issue around supply chains and the global recovery and how what happens to Canada with exports is a really great topic that there's been lots of discussion around. I feel like supply chains were already evolving quite a bit well before COVID and its impact on borders and availability, really around two key areas: trade wars and nationalism, and AI and automation, both of which I feel like we're having really big impact on supply chains. So on the trade wars and nationalism side, I feel like we were seeing a lot of impacts with some trade wars between countries, kind of turning back the tide of globalization, populist leaders tending to rely on emotion, not fact, in building their policies and appealing to what people think is happening, but not necessarily what's really happening. So, as an example, the former US administration blamed globalization for the loss of jobs in the American manufacturing sector, when in reality, 87% of jobs lost in the manufacturing sector in the US were lost to automation and just a different way to process products. AI and automation, for sure, have really accelerated over the last few years, in particular, allowing us to automate more and more tasks, right, and really change the shape of manufacturing in particular. And I think it's also taken away the perceived value and benefit of low-cost labor to do repetitive tasks. So automation is very efficient. It never gets tired. It doesn't make mistakes. And everybody's investing in it, not just in places like Canada, where labor costs are high, but also places like China, where certainly we are automating as much there as we are anywhere. And that too was having a big impact on supply chains. So, and then of course, COVID-19 taught us that we can't always rely on global supply chains. We learned borders can be closed, economies can be closed, protectionism can pop up with countries trying to protect their supply of critical goods, and we're still seeing that. So that brought a whole new dimension to the risk analysis behind supply chain decisions. And, I think the problem is that once global supply chains are integrated, it is very difficult and very costly, with not a lot of return, to reverse that process. Like it's like trying to unscramble eggs. And I think the North American automotive industry is a really great example of that. It's highly integrated. It takes, on average, 7 border crossings in North America to build a vehicle. And if we hadn't successfully renegotiated NAFTA, we would have added enormous costs to duties in North America to vehicles we were building here, killing our global competitiveness in a world where 80% of vehicles are sold outside of North America, and also killing domestic demand just because of higher cost. So, as a real life example here at Linamar, we have a program where an engine block is cast in Mexico, comes to us in Canada to be machined, goes back to the US for an intermediary process, comes back to us in Canada for finished machining. We ship it to an engine plant in the US, that block becomes part of an engine, the engine comes back to Canada to be assembled into a vehicle, and some of those vehicles ship back into the US to be sold to consumers. It's like 6 times that you're crossing the border. And, like I think you wonder like why so complex a supply chain. But to me, it simply boils down to really 4 things. Where is the best combination of quality, cost, technology, and the least risk, right? And that's kind of the beauty of globalization. It really encourages that kind of specialization for countries to become really, really good at different, products or processes. They're not splitting R&D over a whole bunch of different things. They're becoming really innovative around how to make those products and the products design and the processes around it. So, you aggregate the buy, you get a much better outcome in terms of cost and technology. But unfortunately, what we've learned, as we all know in the last few years, is that last piece of the equation of cost, quality, technology, and risk, meaning risk, needs to be more heavily weighed in the decision. And also that cost and technology are really impacted by automation and AI. And I think we've recognized that there's risk in accessing a global supply chain where we might find borders closed, facilities shut, tariffs imposed at will, and possibly outweigh the cost and technology benefits of that supplier. But will risk be the only factor considered and cost, quality, and technology ignored? Personally, I think no. I think that cost, quality, and technology are too important to ignore. And it's not realistic to try for every country to try to be great at everything and making every product. So overall, I think, yes, supply chains are going to shift somewhat to better allow for risks, particularly for products or processes that are considered really critical to a country's health, both the health of its citizens and the health of its economy. But at the same time, I think it's difficult to unscramble the eggs. And in the end, what we really want is the best cost, quality, technology, and we're going to be willing to take a little bit of risk to achieve that.
That's great. Thanks a lot for that, Lyndon. I would just say, too, that your forensic breakdown of how the auto part moves across the border 7 times is great to hear, because until now, no one's actually been able to explain that to me.
Okay, there you go.
So, Robin, why don't we go over to you next?
Great. Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robin Sylvester. I'm the President and CEO of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. And as a Canada Port Authority, we're responsible for the stewardship of the federally owned lands and waters that make up the Port of Vancouver. We work for the benefit of all Canadians in collaboration with our partners, stakeholders, and other members of the port community. And we collaborate closely with terminal operators, federal, local government, industry stakeholders, and local communities to ensure a breadth of voices are heard in the work to keep Canada's Western Gateway strong and competitive. The Port of Vancouver is a significant economic generator, not only for this region, but actually for the entire country. It's interesting in the context of trade diversification to realize that $1 in 3 of Canada's trade in goods outside North America moves through the port in Vancouver. Across Canada, the activities associated with the port support over 115,000 jobs, and port-related supply chain activities alone contribute 10 billion to the nation's GDP, more than 10 billion. We've all seen the pandemic has caused significant negative impact for many industries, including hospitality, tourism, high street retail, and film. But what we've seen from the port is that continuing trade flows have meant the port industries have been able to perform well for this region and for Canada. Somewhat surprisingly, in a positive way, we've seen continued growth in cargo through the port through 2020. As an example, grain exports actually increased by over 25% in 2020 compared to 2019, setting a new record. Potash exports increased by over 10%. And we also saw that container volumes, despite dipping sharply in the early part of 2020, recovered well towards the end of the year and actually finished ahead of 2019 volumes in total, again at record levels. The diversity of cargo handled through the Port of Vancouver is one of its key strengths. It allows the port to be resilient through periods of economic downturn, as we're experiencing right at this moment. It's also, though, critical to the resilience of the port to prepare it and its trade corridors to be ready to handle growth ahead. It's an overused aphorism, but we are a trading nation. And to this end, we're currently leading more than $1 billion worth of infrastructure projects with partners across the Lower Mainland, which are specifically working to address bottlenecks that impact the movement of Canadian goods to and from the port. And it's been great that despite the pandemic, development and construction of these projects has continued to move forward, and they've kept people employed during this challenging period. In a similar vein, some of the projects we're leading address the looming critical issue of scarce container terminal capacity on Canada's west coast. The project that's absolutely top of mind for us is the proposed Roberts Bank Terminal 2 project, a nationally critical project that will, if built, increase the port's container capacity by 1/3, ensuring global market access for Canadian exporters and efficient access to imported goods for consumers and manufacturers as our nation's trade grows. We're experiencing unprecedented times in Canada and across the globe as we grapple with a pandemic that's causing economic challenges and making short-term predictions difficult. But we firmly believe at the Port Authority that the work we're advancing today, including our significant infrastructure agenda and our environmental programs, support a strong, sustainable future, not only for the region here in BC, but for Canada as a whole. So I look forward, with that context, I look forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Robin, for that. And certainly, I think one of the things that we've heard, I think, over the course of 2020 was the export restrictions that countries put on grain products. But obviously, from the stats you've seen, perhaps Canada has, in a somewhat of a way, been a beneficiary of other countries restricting their own movement of those goods. I guess we'll now go to Michael next to give us some perspective from BDC.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for the invitation to be with you. And Linda, Robin, Penny, it's a real honor to be on the panel with you. I've already learned a lot and look forward to learning more from you in the minutes ahead. So Mark, I think most of the folks listening in would know about BDC. We're Canada's development bank. We're Canada's bank for entrepreneurs. We have about 60,000 clients across the country, whole range of industries, a whole range of size. And we're a lender, we provide advice, and we're also Canada's largest venture capital investor. One thing I want to do is just underscore the importance of this topic and today, because if you look at the recovery, look at the state of the economy right now, in large part because of the support the governments have provided and just the resilience of business leaders. In many ways, the economy has come back to its levels of output where it was. And you look at industry by industry, and a lot of industries are ahead of where they were back in February. Bankruptcies are down, corporate balance sheets are stronger than ever. Some industries remain challenged, hotels, food, entertainment, et cetera. But in many ways, a lot of industries have come back. But there's one thing that hasn't come back. And if you go back to last summer, the number of Canadian SMEs, entrepreneurs exporting fell by about 25 to 30% because of the crisis. And that number hasn't come back to the extent that other numbers have. So I think it is important to have a focus on export supply chains, constraints, et cetera, so that we collectively can think through ways to help get that number back to where it was. And think about it, a lot of entrepreneurs and SMEs rely on things that aren't happening now. They rely on trade missions. They rely on trade shows. They rely on their personal contacts and connectivity. And those things either don't exist or just exist in a very difficult to access format right now. So I think the topic's very important. It's heavily relevant for so many of our clients and for SMEs in this country, and I'm glad we're discussing it.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Michael. Penny, why don't you go next?
Great, thanks, Mark. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And this is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, and I'm really delighted to be part of this panel this afternoon and learning from the other panelists. Working for 3M, obviously, I work for a company that we have directly felt the impact of the shifts in policy and barriers that were created during the pandemic. And so that has given me sometimes an uncomfortable but bird's eye view to the impacts, the changes, and time to think about what do we need to do from a Canadian perspective to make sure that we're ready for future events, or what does our economy look like in the new world and what the new global economy looks like moving forward. And I think about those opportunities or kind of those must-dos from a Canadian perspective in two buckets. One is around an industrial strategy that encompasses self-sufficiency. And Linda, you talked about self-sufficiency, that we can't do everything. We've got to pick what we want and we have to prioritize. And you've got to recognize that holistic view. Where are the really big growth opportunities and the drivers of the economy of the future? And we also have to recognize what is changing inside the culture and society and what Canadians want and hold dear. And then my second area that I think is really important is We talk about being a tradition of internationalism, that we are a trading nation. And I think we have an expertise and an opportunity to leverage what we know and what we do really well as an opportunity for the future. And I'm looking forward to discussing a couple of those with the panel this afternoon. But the area of industrial strategy, I think it's really critical to make sure that we are investing in areas of self-sufficiency, but it's not a simple task. We have to do it in the context of the Canadian landscape and what customers and what businesses want and need, not just for today, for tomorrow. There's the COVID response that we need today. There's pandemics of the future, but what are the other trends? And I think about things like Canadian consumers are very accustomed to low cost product and lots of choice. And as we think about self-sufficiency, as we manufacture in Canada often, but not always, we become more expensive and less choice. What is that right balance that we need to get? Earlier this afternoon, there was a panel that really focused on ESG and how stakeholders are focused on ESG and social justice and human rights and workers' rights. How did those impact what our strategy needs to look like? And then what are those growth spaces for the future? And so I think all of these play into what does our future forward look, and what are we learning, and what can we take forward? So thank you.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Penny, for that perspective. You've certainly been on the front lines with your company, so I'll be really curious to unpack that experience a little bit more in the conversation. So let's talk first about supply chains and how COVID has impacted them. I mean, we've seen, a lot of reports in the media. I think companies have had a chance to really take stock and learn a few lessons about how complex their supply chains really are. And I'm thinking just of one phone call that I had last spring with a company they were in the trucking and logistics business, but they had outsourced all of their back office paperwork to a third-party provider. This third-party provider shut down because they deemed themselves to not be an essential business, which meant this trucking company didn't have its licensing paperwork up to date, and they had to start pulling trucks off the road. And so you start to unpack things like that and realize just how complex it really is and how many parts have to be functioning for the whole supply chain to be able to move. So I'd just be curious to know from each of you, what are some of the lessons that you've taken away in terms of the pandemic and the complexity of supply chains? And then also, too, I'd be curious to know a bit about this whole talk of reshoring. How realistic is it, and what may or may not that look like in the future? So maybe, Robin, how about we start with you?
Sure. No, I mean, I guess a few things are sort of top of mind. I mean, first off, I would have to say, and it's credit to many businesses involved in the supply chain system, but the supply chain through the Port of Vancouver was remarkably resilient. And I think we should acknowledge that and be proud of it in terms of the sort of the whether it was the frontline workers who kept turning up every day to keep ships being loaded and unloaded, or to keep trains moving, or to keep trucks moving, to keep goods flowing. And as you say, we all became more focused on the importance of those supply chains when we were almost getting daily countdowns on when the next aircraft or container of PPE was going to arrive in Canada back in sort of almost a year ago now. So I think on the one hand, we saw great sort of resilience and reliability, which was really encouraging. But it has led to a lot of these questions, as you say, about, well, what are the right strategic decisions about what gets manufactured where and why? And I really like Linda's example, actually. If you can't unscramble the omelette. I mean, it's a couple of things that sort of data points that have sprung to mind for me. And I'm with Penny and Linda, I'm cautious to use them because they'll know better. But one is, I mean, who would have thought that the automotive manufacturing supply chains were currently being disrupted because of the rise of use of video games? Because the processing chips that are being used in car navigation systems and graphic systems are produced on similar assembly lines to produce video games. So it's just an interesting example that we probably never would have thought of about how interrelated supply chains have become. Another interesting one, it was a local company that we've been talking to over the last year, manufacturing PPE here in the Lower Mainland in BC. And they're saying that they see an opportunity, of course, to increase manufacturing of PPE in Canada, particularly as we start to have as a country those conversations about strategically what do we want to manufacture. But at the same time, they're really focused on wanting to be sure port capacity is available because their manufacturing chain depends on raw materials that come in from overseas as well as local manufacturing capacity. So I think we are going to see a lot more scrutiny of sort of decisions about how stock is held in the supply chain, where supply chain activities take place. But I firmly believe that we should also be paying attention to how do we ensure our supply chains can continue to be resilient and grow, because it's just not realistic for a nation of our size and complexity to be totally self-sufficient. And exactly as Penny was saying, I mean, that would mean reducing choice and increasing price. And it's hard to imagine those being acceptable choices for everything that we consume.
That's great. Thanks, Robin. Linda, why don't we go to you? I mean, you've had obviously in the example you gave in your opening remarks, quite an interesting, practical supply chain problem that involves moving a lot of products across the border, and we've seen that's been, operating in varying levels of success these days. So, just be curious, what have you taken away from the COVID experience?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a couple things. One, obviously, as I was saying at the outset, that we need to weigh more heavily risk in our supply chain decisions, but not do so at the price of cost, quality, and technology. So we have to get the right balance. I think that if every country decides to become self-sufficient around supply chains, it's going to significantly set back cost and access to great technology. But I do recognize that we may want to look at certain products where the risk of inadequate supply is not bearable for whatever reason, and find ways to bring that capacity and capability into the country, but do so with the knowledge that we may have to make a price sacrifice. I would say also, though, we don't need to have capacity to make every kind of product, as long as we have capability, right? As long as we have the capability to pivot and make things. A great example is what we've just been through in the pandemic. I mean, we changed over machines in a matter of weeks and started making parts for ventilators last March. We started an entire assembly line to build life support, ventilation, and other systems in about 8 weeks or 6 weeks to our first unit. So, I mean, we'd never made ventilators or parts thereof before, but we'd made a lot of different highly precise machine components and assemblies thereof. We have an amazing supply chain management team that did a phenomenal job on that life support system that we built. There were 1,700 different components that our team needed to source supply for, obviously working with existing suppliers, but still, it's a big job. So having those capabilities lets you pivot, right? I mean, we're not the only one who did it. Canada Goose started making, medical gowns, and, other auto suppliers started making masks and other products that were used in the pandemic. So I think what I learned from that is highlighting the importance of the manufacturing sector, and more specifically about maintaining a broad range of capabilities. And the automotive industry is actually a great example of that, because in the auto industry, you're making metallic things that are made from metal, you're making things made from plastic, you're making things made from fabric, all kinds of different products. So it gave us the capability to pivot to make a lot of different things. So we don't have to be able to make all those things here all the time, as long as we've got the skill set by maintaining a strong automotive sector, for instance, or more broadly, maintaining a strong advanced manufacturing sector that could then pivot and do those things. Now, some things you can't pivot to. So those are the ones that now, you think about, okay, if we can't live without those, we better figure out how we can have our own supply of that.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to the concept of having an industrial base in your country to be able to make those pivots as and when the need emerges. So, Penny, why don't we go to you next? I mean, I think everyone would be dying to hear any sort of little interesting tidbits you could give us about the 3M experience.
Okay, well, those are kind of hard to follow after Robin and Linda. Linda covers a lot of really great topics. I really liked how you talked about capabilities, because I think that one of the learnings here is about resiliency and agility and capability. Linda, you talked about partnerships. So, 3M had a partnership with Ford. They were making ventilator or helping us with parts. We were helping them. So I just think it really helped galvanize that expertise and that agility and across not just our corporation, but many companies, that agility and that ability to really move quickly and to pivot and to innovate quickly, that still exists. And somehow previously we were still, we as many companies were doing those things, but not as pointedly. The crisis really helped everyone get very pointed. As I think about, obviously, it obviously showed weaknesses in supply chain and product and how you get product into country as different barriers came up. But I think one thing it also showed was around the world, different governments took different approaches to what lockdown meant and how they focused on industry and whether they shut it down or didn't shut it down. In Mexico, in the maquiladora, really heavy shutdowns, really heavy reduction of work day and what was happening in the maquiladora. And I think that created other opportunities in other parts of the supply chain to pick up the slack and move things forward, and created other opportunities. And I think that focusing on making sure our feeder plants were able to feed raw material acquisition, and having multiple sources of those raw materials so that you had access as things were shifting, all took on different pieces. And the other piece that I think was really important as we think about globalization and supply chain and how we move forward was the relationships with governments and officials to understand what was essential product, what would be included, making sure we understood what the boundaries were so that we had a license to operate effectively within the framework of the global supply chain and how we could move those pieces forward.
That's great. Thanks for that. So, Michael, why don't we turn to you? And you had mentioned some interesting stats about SMEs that had gotten out of the export game that haven't yet been able to get back in. So, I mean, what have kind of been the lessons learned from the client base that you have across the country on supply chains?
Well, my views are, again, I'll be brief because they're consistent with the other panelists. But again, in the middle of the crisis, you do get lots of kind of grand theories of the future. One of the grand theories of the future is this massive push towards reshoring. But like the other panelists, I don't see it. I mean, global supply chains exist for a reason because they are kind of very lean, very efficient. They're low cost. It's a great application of Ricardian economics, which has made sense for centuries. I don't see that fundamentally changing. But again, from what we see, there are three things that I think you will see that take place alongside these global supply chains. First is there will be built-in more redundancy. I think we have learned we can't be as dependent on a single supplier as we've been. Two, I think there will be some tweaking of supply chains to reflect very real geopolitical concerns that folks have. And thirdly, I think to the points that other panelists made, there will be certain items, certain areas, certain commodities, certain requirements the countries do determine of sufficient importance. They need to have local, not so much capacity to Linda's point, but capability to produce when needed. But I think those will be marginal changes that take place around the basic construct of these global supply chains.
Okay, thanks for that. So I guess what I'd like to sort of shift into next is talking a bit about how Canada remains a competitive destination for foreign direct investment. We've seen, for example, in the United States that the Biden administration is looking to advance investment into R&D, have domestic stimulus spending as a way to ensure that companies are doing business within the U.S. So as Canada is looking to have a competitive investment offer as we come out of the pandemic, what are some of those key ingredients? And I'm thinking, Linda, for example, you had talked about the cost, technology, and risk, and sort of that cumulative impact when companies are looking at that. So maybe, Linda, actually, why don't we start with you? Talk a little bit about your views on how Canada can attract FDI.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, I would say that I believe Canada is already a highly competitive region for global investment. We're always so quick to say, what's wrong, but let's just take a second to reflect on what's right. I mean, I look at my own company, Linamar. We have invested $1.5 billion in our Canadian facilities alone in the last 10 years, half of it in the last 5 years. We're constantly investing in our plants here, not because of, because we're patriotic, because we're competitive and we're winning a lot of great business, and we're going to continue to do so. And, I look at some of the great things that we have going for us in this country. We have one of the lowest tax rates in the G7. We have one of the most generous R&D tax credit systems in the world. We have one of the most educated talent pools in the OECD, with more than half, I think, of our population having a, tertiary level of education. We have some of the highest concentrations of tech talent and tech startups in the world that we are boasting here. We're the center of AI and machine learning thinking. We have free trade agreements with, more than 50 countries that represent 2/3 of the world's GDP. So we got a lot going for us. Now, of course, there's going to be areas that we should focus on, but I think we shouldn't ignore the fact that, we do actually have a lot of positive things going on. So in regards to the things we should focus on, I would say 4 key areas. One, the regulatory environment, I think needs to be modernized, particularly in areas where our regulations are highly punitive and very time consuming, and they are hampering investments, particularly in the natural resource area. And I think we can figure this out. Like, we can figure out how we can be environmentally sustainable and still encourage investment. Number 2, I would say focusing on increasing the flows of immigration. The immigration boosts economic growth, and it provides us talent for future growth as well, needed talent. So I really encourage that. Number 3, make sure we've got a cost-effective environment for key input costs. Energy is one example. And again, I think it's not mutually exclusive to have a great national resource and climate strategy that's focused on the future and sustainable, and also have cost-effective energy. And then finally, I would say we should be a lot more assertive in heading out in the world and actively selling Canada's great attributes to attract more investment. We're not going to get investment if we're not out there selling, if we're just sitting back here waiting for somebody to come to us. And I feel like we're not great at selling. We're not great at getting out there and selling what we've got here. I think we've got a lot to sell, and we should be, allying with government and with EDC and BDC to help do this. I mean, we've got a great story. Let's get out there and sell it.
Thanks for that. So, Robin, why don't we turn to you next? I mean, it's a little bit different when you're in a port, but if you're trying to attract the cargo to come to, say, to you versus Los Angeles or another one, you have a bit of a different perspective. So I'd be curious to hear your take on how Canada can remain competitive.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Mark. I mean, I think that I'd answer it in 2 different ways. Firstly, from the point of view of sort of attracting investment in the port, it's absolutely about the same things any business would look for. It's about being a place to invest where you can invest with prospects of getting a good return on your capital. So being part of an efficient supply chain, being in demand, having demand there in terms of movement of cargo, and we're ticking those boxes. I mean, Canada is, the growth we've seen on the West Coast is quite remarkable. I mean, the Port of Vancouver in the last decade has grown in volume by around about 35 million tons. To put that in context, that's roughly what the Port of Montreal handled last year. Port of Montreal is Canada's 2nd largest port. It's also been growing very successfully. So, I mean, we are seeing significant growth in the trade being handled by our ports, which are our primary access to markets beyond North America. And we're doing that effectively and efficiently in a complex developed environment where it is painfully slow to get projects approved. So I think that's one side of it. But the other side, I think that's just as important for businesses across Canada is actually having access to international markets through efficient supply chains. And that really is what we spend a lot of our time thinking about. I mean, enabling trade on behalf of Canada and Canadians is our raison d'etre. And through the port in Vancouver, we enable trade with 170 countries around the world. We've seen significant growth in potash from Saskatchewan going around the world as fertilizer to feed people in numerous different countries, or grain, and in particular in some of the sort of the new specialty grain products, the pulses, the lentils, the protein-based products that are becoming more important. And that supply chain efficiency is just so critical. When I used to be able to travel, when I'd go to Japan, I'd hear from users of the port there who'd say, we really want to know about how you're going to be reliable, how you're going to get more reliable, how you're going to stay reliable. That's what matters to us. So making sure we have a resilient supply chain that can reliably support Canada's growing needs is kind of what keeps us awake at night. And just really quickly, in terms of one area that does worry me, it's a regional problem with national implications, is the shortage of industrial land. I mean, we can only grow by virtue of activities that take place on the land base. We and our partners around the port have been remarkably good about densifying that activity, but we are running out of industrial land in the Lower Mainland, and that's going to lead to either inefficiency in the supply chain, or worse, a dependence on the US if we can't actually create capacity for Canadian trade to be handled in Canada. So that would be top of mind for me, from my perspective, as an issue that concerns me.
And certainly, as they say, land is the one thing that we're not creating anything more of as we look ahead.
Well, we're working hard to, but it's a long, slow process.
So, Penny, why don't we go to you next?
Yeah. So I just wanted to add probably one more point to the points that have been raised, and I talked a little bit about we have a trade expertise, and that we are a trading nation, and that I think that gives us an expertise in the marketplace. And certainly, as I'm talking to my global colleagues within the 3M world, as we look at 3M or we look at Canada, and Linda, you talked about 50 plus countries that have we have trade agreements with. Canada's a very sound, calm economy, trustworthy is maybe not the right word, but that you can trust that we didn't shut our borders to products coming in. We didn't stop the exports of products, so that it's being viewed as, is that something for us to leverage, that we are a trusted trade partner, that as your supply chains, if more of it's flowing through Canada, you can trust that as a global company, your supply chain will continue. You can trust that here in our country. So that's kind of one of the areas that I think is an opportunity for us to explore and really talk about the benefits of what we've been able to create and the value you've created in that trading relationship, those trading relationships over the years.
That's great. Thanks for that. Michael, why don't we turn to you? And I just before you speak, Michael, if I could just say to folks, we do have the Slido app open. So I'm seeing some questions come in, but if folks do want to keep submitting those, we'll try to get through as many of them as we can in the Q&A portion. So Michael, over to you.
What I want to do is I want to talk about the intangibles part of our economy. We, through BDC Capital, we have investments in 800 odd kind of VC-backed kind of tech companies that have at their core intangible assets, IP, et cetera. And kind of to what Linda was saying, the state of play is actually really good in terms of the attractiveness of Canada. From 2015, 2019, FDI into venture capital from the US went from 1 billion to almost 3.6 billion in just 2.5 years. And we work alongside these non-Canadian investors. And what they see and like, and why they invest here, is 3 or 4-fold. First is education, and they look at the quality of the research that's being done in our institutions, look at the quality of the intellectual property coming out of these institutions. 2, they look at the culture of this country and our culture of entrepreneurship. And few people realize this, but we actually, if you can look at the stats, 18% of Canadians are working in or intending to kind of work in an entrepreneurial venture. US at 17%, UK it's 5%. And foreign investors like that spirit of entrepreneurship. Third, we do have, not just in terms of the workplace, not just talent, but affordable talent. And you look at hiring kind of best in class, electrical engineers, coders, what have you. We have world-class talent, but when compared to the Valley, in terms of salaries, options, rents, et cetera, it's a whole lot more affordable to hire this talent in Canada than elsewhere. And then lastly, in terms of this part of the economy, Canada is an easy place to do business. We have these great trade agreements, which make international expansion potentially smooth. And the state of play around regulation, et cetera, is not particularly burdensome versus other countries and other geographies. So in terms of the intangible part of the economy, which is so important and becoming more important, Canada is an attractive place. And as you look ahead, I mean, we need to make sure we have a competitive fiscal setup for investors. We need to make sure that we have, we've made steps in this regard, steps underway to protect and support intellectual property. We also need to make sure we continue to attract talent, because as these investments come, as these companies grow, talent's going to become even more important than it has been thus far.
Okay, thanks for that, Michael. So I'm going to start turning to the audience Q&A, and there's one question here. They've asked about the economic relationship that Canada has with China and India, but I actually want to broaden it out a bit more to talk about trade diversification in general terms. It's something that, for as long as I can remember, alongside the buzzword trading nation, trade diversification can hang up right alongside it on the ranking sheet. So I'd just be curious to know your thoughts on why haven't we been able to really capitalize and execute trade diversification in the way that we sort of think that we should be doing, and what are some of those missing ingredients that we need to put into the mix? So maybe Robin, how about we start with you on this one?
Yeah, well, I guess in some ways I'm not the right person to ask, because I'm seeing the diverse part of the trade. I mean, it's interesting, if you look at the major trading partners through the Port of Vancouver, China is the largest at around sort of 20% of the volume. Next up is Korea and Japan. They kind of swap places. Next up is the US, interestingly. So I mean, there's about 5-6% of the trade through the port is actually with the US. And then after that is India, which is literally the other side of the globe. So, I mean, we are enabling trading relationships around the world, and we're seeing significant growth in those trading relationships. So I think there is a lot of diversification that is happening on the back of the quality of resources that are produced in Canada, whether it's food, being grains, seafood, meat, or whether it's forest products, or whether it's potash, or whether it's steelmaking coal. We are a producer of high quality resources that are in demand. And we're also seeing significant growth in containers from what Canadians are consuming from around the world. I mean, sourced from diverse places, and also what our manufacturing businesses are using as intermediates in their manufacturing processes, which again, they're sourcing through these integrated supply chains. So I guess I really only see the diversification, but I mean, we do see substantial diversification of trade relationships taking place through the port, and we do see strong growth in those relationships.
So, Robin, maybe just to understand a bit more then, in terms of the actual, if I can call it the sort of basket of countries that the cargo is going to through the port, where are you seeing the trends? I mean, is there one particular market that is showing the most growth in it, or that may be having the most growth potential in the future?
It's a great question. It's interesting. If you look over the last decade or so, I mean, India has steadily marched up the list from being in the top 10 to now being in the top 5. And that really is reflecting the quality of agricultural products that are produced here that are in demand with that growing population. We do see also some of the movement in manufacturing base in Asia. I mean, we now have direct services, container services connecting the port with Vietnam. Those weren't in place 10 years ago. So as manufacturing moves around sort of somewhat out of China into Southeast Asia, we see the trade relationships changing a bit to keep up with that. But we also see significant trade with South America. I mean, whether it's steelmaking coal or whether it's grain going in large quantities to South America. Going back to, I think it was Linda was saying, I mean, we have, as Canada, we have more trade agreements around the world than I think any other nation. I think we're the only G7 country with a trade agreement with every other G7 country. And that stands us in good stead. So it's not any one relationship that's changing. It's actually the sort of the factors that when you go down to a slightly more micro level, that you see evolution in line with the global trends that we read about daily. But we certainly see that movement over time underpinning the strong growth that we're seeing.
Thanks. Linda, I'd be curious to hear from your perspective as a global company, what you're seeing in terms of the trade diversification landscape. Mm-hmm.
I think that, I mean, in Canada, we live beside the world's largest economy. Of course, we're going to be drawn there first, and rightly so, right? It's a huge, very accessible market, and it's a great place to start. But I do think for our businesses to become more global, I think part of it is them setting broader goals. I remember 40 years ago, my dad set a goal of Linamar being $1 billion in sales. He was, mostly Canadian at the time. Of course, he had to expand his scope to North America to achieve that. And 20 years ago, I set a goal of being 10 billion in sales. I knew we weren't going to get there by just focusing on North America. I set a global strategy in place for our business, and we have dramatically expanded globally. So, you need to set bolder goals, broader goals that force you to look to a different market, a more diverse market, whether it's geographically or even from a product perspective. I do think at the same time, our government can play a role in helping to facilitate global growth for our businesses. And, for sure, part of that is our approach to foreign relations. Sometimes I find our government can be a little too critical of foreign governments that might not align to our values. And it's not helpful, right, in creating those strong foreign relations. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm suggesting that we set our values aside, not at all, okay? I just think it means that we need to be a little more creative and a little more diplomatic in how we communicate that and where, like Asian cultures. I mean, the question started out about China. Asian cultures are all about saving face. Anybody who's done business in China knows that you have to be aware of that. You never, ever publicly criticize somebody in Asia. You create a relationship with them first, and then maybe quietly in the background you have a conversation with them around areas that you have concerns with and ideas on how they can address them. Once you're a friend, not before. So I think we need to be a little bit careful, but I do appreciate that it's a bit of a balancing act because, there are concerns and values and we need to balance that out. But I think we can do that and communicate that in a way that's a little less sort of in your face in order to try to develop strong foreign relations.
Thanks for that. Michael, I'd like to actually just keep getting through a couple of more audience questions. Maybe we'll pivot to a different one for you, and that's one around what are the pilots and programs and incentives to get SMEs working with large companies to be able to plug those SMEs into a larger company's supply chain in order to access global opportunities?
Mark, that's such a good question because when we talk to our clients, especially smaller ones, the way we encourage them to participate in international opportunities is as part of the supply chain and kind of going international with ideally Canadian OEM. And again, only 12% of Canadian SMEs export, and of those, 87% just export to the US. So becoming part of a larger supply chain, again, the Canadian OEM especially, is a very attractive way for companies to participate in opportunities around the world. So there are a number of ways we encourage our clients to be part of it. One is, and this is fairly recent, about 5 or 6 years ago, these kind of super clusters were put in place to basically aggregate capabilities and connect OEMs with intellectual property with smaller companies to come up with new products, new business ideas to succeed internationally. So we encourage, especially a lot of our tech companies, tech clients, to be part of those. Second, we encourage larger corporations in Canada to invest as kind of venture capitalists or strategic investors in these smaller technology companies, and through that, these companies get access to larger markets. But it is, and frankly, to Linda's point, a lot of Canadian OEMs, and Linamar is a very impressive, noteworthy example here, get the importance of supporting local supply chains. And there are some groups, there's an Ontario Global 100, the Quebec Global 100, which are groups that are formed by large Canadian companies that are set up to provide mentorship and market opportunities for the next generation of large Canadian companies. So I take a lot of comfort in the fact that leaders like Linda kind of get this issue, and the large Canadian OEMs do support Canadian SMEs to participate in these international opportunities.
Okay. Thanks for that, Michael. So Penny, there's a question that's come in about the supply of N95 masks and production here of PPE, but actually what I'd like to instead do is broaden out the question a bit more to ask about, we've been focusing in the short term on producing PPE to be servicing the Canadian market. What do you see as the opportunity for Canada to actually become a PPE producer that exports those products abroad? I mean, what do we need to do to be able to move into that space to really make PPE a growth opportunity for Canadian exporters?
Okay, well, those are going to be the tough questions at the end that are off the cuff, right? So I think there are a few elements that come into play, and I think we talked about a few people. I'm going to have to think and talk at the same time here. I think that PPE is kind of only one part of what you need to. I want to just step back, right? So PPE is only one part of what you need to be ready for a pandemic, and this whole idea of self-sufficiency. And I think it's really, first of all, defining what PPE is and what the requirements are that you want, not just in Canada but around the world, and making sure that that we understand what those are, because the PPE requirements that we thought we needed in March may have shifted, and as obviously the CDC and the World Health Organization provide continued updates, that continues to shift. So I think you need to have that. You need to have, Linda talked about capability, you need to have the expertise, you need to have some of that science behind what you need to do to create those PPE. And I think all of those already exist within the Canadian marketplace. I think if you look at all the different companies that have stepped up to create and build PPE, and all the startups across the country, and all the businesses that have shifted to create PPE, I think it talks about how we do have an opportunity to create more of a PPE, market within the country and export. And I don't know the the numbers, and I would have to do a little bit of digging, but I am sure that the PPE that's being created, I bet there is some export where it's appropriate and where we could be ready for the future. Because certainly as some of these companies scale up, there will be enough PPE to start shipping to other parts of the world. So I actually think that part will start to happen more organically as these different companies scale up and get more comfortable and build more product as we move forward. And as our governments stockpile and as our hospitals have what they need from a PPE perspective, you'll start to see heads lifted about where else can this go and how do we build this business and how do we take that expertise forward.
That's great. Thanks for that perspective. Linda, I'd like to actually pose a similar question to you. When you talked a bit about the 1,700 part ventilator, production line that you had to put together. And I mean, what's your perspective on Canada becoming an exporter of this medical technology going forward?
Oh, I think it's a huge opportunity. I mean, the whole medical technology, biotech sector is actually like thriving in Canada as well. I mean, there's huge centers of capability, all kinds of companies doing some really innovative things in the whole medical device, medical technology area. So it's actually an area that Linamar is actively strategizing around expanding into. I mean, we were already going down that road before the whole ventilator thing came up. And although ventilators are not necessarily going to be the right product for us, we think there's a lot of other products that are actually very interesting, some that have been developed by Canadian companies that we're actively working with to be manufacturing partners for. An example is a company in Toronto, Synaptive. They have developed some super interesting technology of a very sort of light footprint MRI that is like literally 2,000 pounds instead of 10,000 pounds. Can be put anywhere in the hospital, not just it just runs in a different way. So it doesn't have the same infrastructure requirements, not just a weight. So you can have it in the operating room, you can have it in the ER, you can have it, wherever you need it. And this was developed by a Canadian company in Toronto, and we're going to make it. So it's a great example of collaboration, of great innovative technology that's being developed, and marrying that up with strong Canadian manufacturing to take it to a global stage.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So Robin, there's a question here about infrastructure reputation that the audience has submitted, and I'd just be curious, when you're on your travels abroad, and you mentioned Japan as an example, what are you hearing about the perception of Canada? And whenever we have, whether it's strikes or infrastructure disruptions, how does that materially affect what you're hearing on your travels abroad when you did them, or in your discussions now virtually with folks who want to do business through the Canadian ports?
Yeah, as you'd expect, it's a topic we hear a lot about, and I think there are two perspectives we hear most often, which are both areas we as a country need to focus on and continue to improve. One is the concern about reliability, and we could defend it by saying objectively there are very few disruptions in the port system. To a customer who's experienced one, and there have been them, it doesn't matter because the experience is so painful that they remember it. So I think it is really important that we continue to focus on reliability in the supply chain, which comes through good labor relationships. It comes through sort of investment in resilience, and it comes through making sure that we protect the supply chain that we have and keep it operational. So we hear that. The other thing that we hear, particularly in Asia, it would be no surprise, where we're talking about critical projects like the Terminal 2 container project in Roberts Bank, which is essential to Canada to be able to preserve our capacity to grow our trade. And we've been talking about that going through the regulatory process for 7 years now. And we hope that we'll get a positive decision this year. And that's not to say that as Canadians, we want shoddy process. We want good decisions to be taken about the environmental mitigation required for these projects to move forward. But we are slow to get to those decisions by comparison with many players on the world stage. And I think that's something we have to continue to pay attention to.
Okay. Thanks, Robin. So there's been a question that was submitted, and I think it's directed to Linda specifically, and that's around what are the shifts that SMEs in the advanced manufacturing supply chain need to make in order to support a larger OEM such as yourself who might want to bring them on board as a supplier? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, again, I come right back to those, the key factors around supply chain decisions: cost, quality, technology, and risk. So, what are they bringing to the table that is compelling in one or more of those categories? And preferably technology, right? I mean, to me, innovation is the underlying driver of competitiveness. You're competitive if you've got great innovative products and you're super efficient at how you're going to make them. If you can combine innovation and efficiency, like you're going to be competitive all day long. So that's what we are looking for in our suppliers, and it's what our customers are looking for in us as well. So I would say invest in innovation, invest in ways that you can continue to develop and accelerate your products. That technology is evolving so fast. Get involved with organizations. Michael brought up the superclusters. NGen is the advanced manufacturing supercluster. They have hundreds of members across the country, in fact, that they can connect an SME into all kinds of different companies in the supply chain to work collaboratively on a project to bring it to realization. And there's real money available to help fund that. So that's a great way to help accelerate innovation and take advantage of all the new technologies and advanced manufacturing to drive that innovation and B, efficiency.
Thanks. So maybe just before we turn to everyone's closing thoughts, I mean, Penny, I'd like to just put that question to you as well about how do you, from a 3M Canada perspective, think is the best way for an SME to get ready to onboard themselves into your company's supply chain?
So from our perspective, I think that similar to a lot of the things that Linda already covered, it is about obviously as a leading innovation company, thinking about the innovation, how does it plug in, thinking about it in terms of meeting the supply chain needs, getting involved, making sure that we're able to connect through these different kinds of superclusters or different ways that those technologies and ingenuity come forward. Those are, I think, the best ways to get engaged and get plugged in to the technologies and what we need to do in our supply chain and how we need to move forward with that.
Thanks. So maybe what we'll do is we'll just kind of go down the line once and give folks a chance maybe to share any concluding thoughts or reactions to what they've heard before we then will pass it back to Catherine to see us through to the last speaker. So maybe, Michael, how about we start with you?
Just Mark, for the members who are listening in, I guess the call to action would be, I'd certainly like to see more Canadian companies and SMEs export. As I say, they're 12% of those, 80% go to the US. So for those of you that are going to the US, you found the formula. There are many tools out there and supports out there that allow you to kind of de-risk moving into other markets. I encourage you to look at those. And for those SMEs that aren't exporting, again, focus on becoming productive, focus on getting scale. And once you're ready, again, lots of supports in place to help you find opportunities around the world and in the US.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Robin, over to you for any closing thoughts you want to leave with the audience.
I think Michael gave me the perfect intro, and I build on it strongly to say, I mean, we should firstly acknowledge that the exports have been a resilient part of our economy through this pandemic, and we absolutely want to encourage more of them. To be successful, looking at it from the point of view of an infrastructure trade enabler, we need to keep investing in the infrastructure to create the capacity to allow our companies to grow their export trade.
Thanks, Robin. Penny?
Yeah, thanks. One of the questions that was on the original discussion guide that we didn't get to was what keeps us up at night. And I wanted to just close with that. What keeps me up at night is how do we be ready to come out of the pandemic and come out of COVID-19? A lot of the ideas and information that we just talked about, how do we make sure that we are resilient and positioned and still not in crisis mode, but ready to come out and boost the economy and drive these decisions and ideas forward that we need to around industrial strategy, around how we're going to build exports, around how we're going to leverage what the new global economy looks like, and that's from a government, from a business, from an economic perspective. We really need to think about how we position ourselves to be ready for the future, and not wait for the future to get to us.
Thanks, Penny. Linda, the last word of the panel, over to you.
Okay, great. Well, I guess in conclusion, I would say, as I think you've heard most of us articulate, we're not as concerned about this whole concept of, reshoring and a movement away from global opportunities. I think that there will be some shifts as discussed, but for the large part, I think there's still massive opportunity in terms of global markets for us to tap into if we're innovative, if we're efficient, which is what makes us competitive, if our governments work arm in arm with us around regulation, around immigration, around going, out in the world and selling the Canadian story. I think we can bring more investment here. Of course, there's always going to be supply chain issues. I mean, Robin brought up the semiconductor chip issue, which is plaguing the automotive industry right now due to the spike in demand for consumer goods. And, I think it's indicative of something that's popped up a few times in terms of risk in supply chains that are too concentrated. We saw that with the Japanese tsunami a few years ago that also uncovered some highly concentrated supply of certain products. So I think, we're all alert to this, that we need to try and uncover some of these risky concentrations. But at the same time, try and balance not splitting the supply too much to impact cost and technology. And again, it always comes back to that balance of cost, quality, technology, and risk. And then lastly, I will say, looking a little longer term, and I'm glad Penny brought up what do things look like post-pandemic, which, we're rapidly moving towards. And personally, I think we're going to see a surge of demand when we get to the other side of the pandemic. I think it's going to put a lot more pressure on demand for people, for supply chains, maybe inflation. So I think, yes, some challenges, but I think some great economic growth coming. And I think that huge opportunities for Canadian companies to take advantage of that.
Well, Linda, Robin, Michael, and Penny, thanks so much for sharing the insights that you have today as we head into the next phase of the pandemic, as the Chamber has launched yesterday our Recovery Leadership Council, and as we head into a federal budget. I think what we've heard today has given certainly myself, and I think everyone else, a lot of food for thought as to what the future has in store for Canada in the context of a global economic recovery. And I think, just as someone who spends a lot of time thinking about these issues day to day, on a personal note, it's just nice to hear a bit of an uplifting message about some of the more hopeful aspects, rather than sort of being the glass half full all the time like it does feel. And so with that, thank you once again for making the time.